next talk will be given by Olaf. And again, if people in the back want to come down and find a more comfortable seat, please do so while we're shifting things around.
Good morning. It certainly is a tremendous honor to be speaking at this occasion, and also a real challenge. Speaking after Linda is a bad assignment because there really is no way to improve on that, and Linda is the embodiment of the interdisciplinary nature of this department. And we met not by chance, I would say, but at these crazy little meetings, as you put it, in the late 90s. At the inception of a new field, and that is how I made my connection with the department, and I've been really grateful ever since. I want to say a few words about connectivity as it matters in my own field, which is the brain, and then also a few words about how connectivity matters among people who collaborate, and collaborate sometimes in very large consortia now in my field. And I want to share with you a few of the social observations and other things that I've come across over the years. Linda has already talked about the multi-level nature of brain and behavior, and I think diagrams like this abound now, and everybody understands, I think, that it is not sufficient anymore to pay attention to just one level of organization, to just one temporal or spatial scale when we're dealing with the organization of the nervous system and what it does. I have started my own career way back down here in the underbrush, so to speak, of molecules and synapses, and worked my way up the scale, so to speak, ever since. And I've always been interested in connecting these levels together, and I've always resisted people saying that it's sufficient to study just one level and understand everything based on that. There are connections, there are pathways between these levels, and I think we are beginning to exploit these more and more in our research. Connectivity is a major theme, not only in the brain, but across many different disciplines now. There's a new field on the horizon, or it's actually arrived, called network science. And in biological systems, we now understand that studying interactions among proteins or studying comorbidity patterns in diseases will give rise to very new network representations of how complex biological systems are organized. And there's even a new field out there that's been around for about 10 years called systems biology, which is targeting those relationships between molecules, metabolites, cells, and tissues explicitly. And one of the explicit goals of that field is to construct mathematical, computational models of biological systems that are both predictive and can account for empirical findings. This is something that is increasingly important also in our own field of psychological and brain sciences. Here at IU, we have a tremendous assortment of people who are interested in network science. We're really a hub in the field, a national hub, an international hub. Many of our colleagues in cognitive science and neuroscience, and also in our department, are engaged in network research. I want to just point out here Peter Todd and Stan Wasserman. Stan would be very upset if I didn't advertise his journal, which is the first journal devoted to network science. Started just this year and run under his editorial guidance. So IU really is well positioned in this connectivity-based network science field, the new field of network science. Obviously, networks are important in the brain. This is a trivial thing to state. There are networks of neurons and synapses and how they're connected to each other. And there's, of course, also networks of David Pisoni is giving me hand signs back there, and I hope they're not. What did you say? Yes, okay, very good. Thanks, David. Good. This always catches my attention when David gets up and gesticulates. Yeah, exactly. So we have networks at all levels of scale, obviously, in the brain among individual neurons, synaptic connections that connect them together and allow them to fire in conjunction, and of course also networks of regions and interregional pathways at the macro scale of the whole brain. And we're beginning to study in neuroscience these networks in ever greater detail. And connectivity is fundamental for understanding how neurons respond, how they fire in response to inputs, how they guide behavior, how they are involved in cognition. And that point has been made over the years by many people. It's not a new point at all. 20 years ago, Francis Crick, no other than Francis Crick, and the anatomist Ted Jones wrote a commentary that was entitled The Backwardness of Human Neuroanatomy, in which they bemoaned the fact that we had no connection map for the human brain, and expressed their belief that without such a map we could not understand what the human brain did except in the most crude way. I've always subscribed to that belief that connectivity is foundational for understanding especially the human brain. And so a few years after that, we proposed to actually map the entire set of connections among brain regions, at least at the macro scale, in the human brain. And we thought it was so foundational that we gave it the term, the connectome, in deliberate analogy to the genetic basis for cellular function, which is of course the genome. That led to first explorations of, that led to now somebody else is gesticulating. You can't hear me. Okay. I'm too tall. Maybe I should go. Barry Manilow is going to take over now. How is this? Okay. I'm going to speak directly into the microphone now. Yes. Very good. Now it all becomes clear, because now you can actually hear me. So far it's been a pantomime. But let's just get back to the connectome was our proposal in 2005 as a foundation for understanding connectivity in not only the human brain but in brains in general. We set up our own collaboration with Patrick Hagman, about whom I'll say a few words later on. First, creating a first draft of the Human Connectome. I mean, some of these pictures are out there in the hallway. And in 2009, this goal of mapping all of the human brain's connections became institutionalized in a way by NIH with the Human Connectome project, which started in 2010. I'll say a few more words about this later on, and has now begun to release datasets publicly. We have learned a lot about how the connectome is organized based on network science methodology, some of which was developed here at IU, and we have reason to believe that the connectome is extremely important for brain function. You know this from a number of different avenues now. There's a robust relationship between anatomical connections, the pattern of these connections in the human brain, and the functional connections, the dynamic relationships that ensue when the brain becomes active, either at rest or during task evoked activity. We also know that we can model brain connectivity very efficiently, very nicely, using connectivity data sets as our input, and that's the project that later became known as the virtual brain. I'll say a few more words about this in a moment. We also know that variations in connectivity are associated with individual variations in behavior and cognition, and that they are also associated with pretty much all disease states, all states of brain and mental disorders. I want to say a few words about these two very large consortia that are formed in part in response to the research carried out here. And say a few words about how they're organized, what they've done so far, and where, at a sort of social network level, where they've succeeded and perhaps failed. The connectome was proposed in 2005, that was the initial trigger to start this field. It's been on an exponential increase, the field itself, over the past several years in terms of number of publications, and it's also ranging across different model organisms. Now there are connectome projects underway for the Drosophila, for the rodent brain, and for the macaque, and of course, most importantly, for the human. And the Human Connectome project started in 2010. It was endorsed at the highest levels of NIH, one of the few NIH blueprint projects. That's how important it was deemed by NIH leadership. And two major grants were awarded in 2010, one of them going to a consortium that IU is a part of, the Human Connectome project. It funded at $30 million. And two phases of the project have unfolded or are unfolding. The first phase of this project involved refinement of methodology, analysis methods, acquisition methods, and then a second phase of data acquisition and data release. That's now underway. The project team is extremely large, 33 investigators, over 90 project personnel all together, working together at 9 different institutions, including IU. The lead is at Washington University and University of Minnesota and Oxford. The goal of this project involves, the first goal involves the acquisition of 1,200 data sets from individuals who are in a healthy state, in a certain age range, and those data sets include resting state task fMRI, as well as structural imaging revealing structural brain connections. There will be some subset of these individuals studied with high field strength, also with MEG and EEG, and there is an extensive battery of behavioral cognitive tests that go along with that. These subjects spend not only 4.5 hours on an MRI scanner, but they're spending close to a day undergoing behavioral and cognitive testing and demographic data acquisition and so forth, and eventually also genotyping. The interesting thing about this project is that all the data are publicly available and are being released in a timely fashion, so anybody out there who has an interest in studying patterns of brain connectivity, patterns of heritability of brain connectivity, relationship to genomics, can do so by simply going online, signing a user agreement, and downloading these data sets. It will be eventually on the order of a petabyte of data, 1,000 terabytes. There have been lots of coverage. There's been lots of coverage of the Connectome project, various special issues in journals such as Trends in Cognitive Sciences and Neuroimage, and the Connectome is now part of the educational program of the largest brain imaging organization, the Organization for Human Brain Mapping, and has been so for the past 3 years. So it's becoming important. And of course, it's always nice to work on something that's endorsed at the highest level of the administration. As Vice President Biden here says, the Connectome project will lead to major advances in our understanding of how our brain circuitry changes as we age and how it differs in people with neurological and psychiatric illnesses. I defer to him on that. Any questions? Any doubts you might have about that? Joe is for it, so we're in good shape. We're in good shape. So this is our project, a picture taken at one of our project meetings, and it's a very large consortium. You might say, is this really working very well? Imagine you take a group of primates and you'd ask them to cooperate. All hell breaks loose, typically. It's been a remarkably cooperative experience so far, just in case you're wondering where I am over there. It's been a remarkably cooperative experience of exchanging expertise, of working together on common goals, making milestones, ultimately releasing data, working with people who are in physics, who are in neurology, who are in psychiatry, who are in psychology, who are engineers and computer scientists. It's been a remarkably agreeable and productive arrangement so far. A big part of the project also is outreach. We have booths now regularly at SFN and OHBM meetings, which involve educating the scientific discipline and also the general public about the goals of the project, about using and downloading data sets and using and downloading software tools that go with it. So there's a large component of this which devoted to educating and attempting to disseminate the findings in the data sets themselves. Here is the second part project, the virtual brain, building on the premise that the connectome, the structural network up on top, actually is important for making the brain tick, so to speak, for allowing brain regions to communicate with each other, to show correlated patterns of firing. And this was supposed to be 2 movies, but I don't think I can start them from here, so you must take my word for it. There's dynamic brain activity on the left coming from a human being, while the picture on the right is actually coming from a set of about 10,000 coupled differential equations run in a computer using some simple biophysics and connectome data sets as the underpinning. And we can generate synthetic fMRI signals using these computational approaches. That was the main rationale for starting the Virtual Brain project about 8 years ago now, funded by the McDonald Foundation, probably now in its last year of funding. The principal aims was to understand how connectome networks actually shape functional connectivity, build computational models that can model this process, and then apply these models in a clinical context, principally focusing on stroke and stroke recovery. An international team of investigators, very international, stretching from Europe to Australia to the US, North America, various parts, and explicitly linking 3 different areas, clinical, cognitive, and computational neuroscience. The investigators in this have a very wide range of backgrounds, not only psychology and neuroscience, but also neurology, psychiatry, engineering, computer science, physics. So it's been a very interesting experience to work with all of these colleagues. It's been a highly productive project. I've pulled the last few project reports, the annual reports, and count the number of publications, 122 over the last 2 years. And also a very interesting experience, I think, for many of the graduate students and postdocs who were associated with this project. Gave them a very rich playground to make connections of their own and to be exposed to different influences in different fields. Again, outreach is a major part of this. Social media, corporate partners, organizing educational workshops, now more recently online-based webinars and so forth that we're putting together to educate others in the field who might be interested in using these approaches in their own research programs. Even art installations. There was an event last week in Toronto which involved the which involved the collaboration of visual and musical artists with some of the project team up in Toronto to create an installation, an overnight installation that used EEG patterns to light up a dome which was erected somewhere in the middle of Toronto. I would have liked to be there, but I missed it. A third project that is for me, from my taste, somewhat over the top. This is the Human Brain Project in Europe. This is the organizational chart that went into the project proposal, which was submitted in 2012. And again, if you're wondering where's good old me, I'm down there. You can imagine, you can get lost in a project like this. This has 150 investigators. Notice, by the way, the high representation of computation, robotics, neuromorphic computing, high-performance computing, brain simulation, neuroinformatics. This project is targeted to create a model, computational model of the human brain at the cellular scale by 2025, and therefore lots of computational resources thrown at it. I've since sort of gone away because it became very difficult to keep track of what was going on in my own little neck of the woods here or elsewhere. So I'm not sure how much project integration will be a challenge for a project of this size. This has just begun to the tune of $1.3 billion in funding. It's a B, and over 10 years. So we'll see how that will mature. Now I come to my social part here. A few observations on what has and hasn't worked for myself in the very large consortia I've been associated with, but also the smaller scale collaborations that in the end I think are really driving the creative part of science. Being part of a large consortium like the Human Connectome project and the Human Brain project, that allows you to work with some of the best people in the field across different subdisciplines, and it creates a sort of a marketplace of ideas when you are not the only game in town. Other people have ideas that are competing with yours, and it's a very a nice way of sort of keeping your own thinking moving about how things should be done and what the important approaches are in your own field of science. Because there are often milestones, there's a high priority to problem solving. You can't get stuck simply because you just can't. You have to move past roadblocks, you have to solve problems, you have to move forward in a good direction. And there are many training opportunities of the kind I've just mentioned earlier for students and postdocs to become enmeshed, naturally enmeshed, not just becoming part of one lab, but becoming part of a larger group of individuals who are pulling in the direction of a common goal. There's also challenges. There is no place to hide in a large project. Whatever your part is that needs to be done, it needs to be done, and there's no way to go away and do something else. There's always someone smarter than you, usually also 20 years younger, which is the part I really hate. And there are many doodle polls about online meetings, WebEx meetings, teleconferences, physical meetings, who knows what. Because these projects tend to be high profile, there are stringent reporting requirements. The agencies, NIH for example, sit in at all the meetings online as well as physical meetings for the Human Connectome project. And quite often it goes now hand in hand with a commitment to data sharing and sharing of tools, computational tools. So what you do, the tools you create, the data sets that you work with, they have to go online at some point and be made publicly available, and that creates certainly challenges. It's also hard sometimes to find a balance between contributing to a large project like this and at the same time still doing your own thing, which is to do the thing that you care about the most, the new stuff. And that's a balance that has to be struck by everyone. On balance, I think that creative work can perhaps lead to big science projects, which are essentially focused on generating big data sets and creating foundations for entire fields. But the creativeness within such big science projects is, I think, limited, and creativeness has a much easier way to flourish in small-scale collaborations of the kind that Linda mentioned earlier, and of which I have many ongoing as well. I highlight a few of these here with my friend Rolf Kötter, who passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately, Patrick Hardman, Martin Vandenheuvel, and Ed Wilmore, all of them coming from different backgrounds, 3 of them actually having a clinical background in neurology and psychiatry, and all of them extremely instrumental in my own intellectual growth, if there was any, over the past few years, in terms of keeping me moving forward in a hopefully positive and productive direction. What makes for a great collaboration? You have common goals, you have matching expertise, you have sometimes quite complementary skills. Patrick Hagman, for example, had developed an ingenious new way of mapping structural connections in the human brain using diffusion spectrum imaging. We had expertise on our side in network analysis. Those two pieces fit together perfectly and were instrumental in us creating the first draft of the Human Connectome. There's also ample opportunities, and these help to strengthen collaborations, to exchange people. Students from Patrick's and Martin's labs have come here, have spent time here, and we have tried to reciprocate as well. And it always involves taking on board a different perspective, listening to somebody who does not have your background, does not speak the same language, and has a different take on what the underlying neurobiological reality that we all care about actually looks like. There's two other aspects of making connections that I want to emphasize. There's the connections that we help make among our trainees and students, and the students help us make connections of our own. I increasingly look at teaching as a way for me to stay connected with new influences and new movements in the field. I have had many very important experiences in this regard in my graduate and undergraduate classes, where students have actually got me in touch with entirely new ideas and other laboratories. Having open lab meetings helps. We used to do these, we should do these more often. We have flagged a little bit recently, but bringing people in from other institutions, from other laboratories, also from the department as a whole. Sending students abroad or to other labs for a given time in the summer, for a summer school or an internship, I think is really an important part of this too. And hosting other students and visitors. We've had a string of visitors come by our own lab the last 2 years. These are all, for the most part, PhD students who were sent our way because the PIs were interested in them picking up new skills and getting exposed to new ideas. So we ourselves have profited greatly from that because they have brought in new approaches and new ideas into our lab. So it also creates a sense of community. The lab is much bigger than it actually is because of all these influxes and outflows of people and ideas. Secondly, it helps to make connections in the field, not involving you but others, if you make your tools and data available publicly. In my field, that is increasingly the norm, and it's increasingly possible with the increasing cheapness of computation and the increasing expansion of IT infrastructure. We've made, for example, our toolset, our brain connectivity toolset available for the past dozen years, and I just checked using Google Analytics yesterday how many unique visitors we've had over the past 12-month period, and we had over 12,000 visitors. The toolset has been used, I can't quite get the number right, but I think it's about 700 publications over the last 3 or 4 years alone. So it's a way of sharing your stuff freely, is a way of encouraging others to do what you're doing, moving it forward in the process, and also encouraging application, which is an important part of the scientific process. So where's it all going? Here's where I'm overlapping up with what Linda said at the end, and perhaps this is leading into our panel discussion in just a moment. I think it's a moot point almost to say that collaborative work is on the rise. There's a very large number now of multi-author publications, either small-scale collaborations of 1 or 2 or 3 laboratories working together, or a very large consortia of the kind I've mentioned earlier. And why is that? It's because it's becoming increasingly impossible to understand what we care about by looking just at one level of organization. We have to have expertise from people who study genetics. We have to have expertise from people who study or model behavior. Computation is a big part of the game, an expanding part. So we are destined to walk along this path of increasing collaborative activity, I think. We also have a steady increase in funding mechanisms, not only NIH and NSF, but other funding mechanisms as well. And there's a steady influx into neuroscience from people who have degrees not in neuroscience or psychology, but degrees in computer science, physics, or engineering. And those young scientists are making very important contributions in our field. There's also a tendency perhaps afloat to move away from just hypothesis testing, experimentation in a small-scale study, to these very large-scale discovery science endeavors. And this is where the somewhat too fashionable term of big data actually raises its ugly head. There's a lot of availability now of public data sets, genomics and brain imaging, behavioral data that can be mined, that can be accessed freely. And that is the result of increasing efforts to do data sharing in order to ensure cumulative process in the field. There's also a strong rise, which I think is completely irreversible, of computation and informatics tools across our discipline. And there's a growing need, this is a point that I know Rich cares about a lot. We've had many hallway discussions about this. Public data is all wonderful, cross-level organizational data is wonderful, but where's the causality? How can we establish causal relationships from genes to people and back using these large big data sets? So my final point then is that the increased connectivity that I've experienced over the years, the increase in connectivity among people, among disciplines, is beginning to change the way, not only the way in which we do science in a social enterprise, but also the kind of questions that we're asking in our field. And this department has always been at the forefront of that. I travel around the country now and then. I have people come up to me who know this department very well and who know about the unique tradition that we have of not just living in our little silos or in our little black boxes, but actually going beyond that and making these connections happen not only in the department, but also beyond the department. And this department has always been at the forefront of taking this integrative style, this cross-level, cross-disciplinary style into the domain of psychological and brain sciences. So it's a fitting, I hope, occasion today to talk about this a little bit and see in the coming panel discussion where the field is actually going and what our role is as a department in making that happen. Thank you very much.
Okay, after those two really wonderful talks, I'm sure there are some questions that audience has for Linda or Olaf or both. If you speak really loudly, just stand up and ask your question. If you have a softer voice, please come down and use the mic.
You mentioned the EU project on the brain. What's going on with the US initiative?
I have been to a few.
Yeah.
I was asking him about what's happening with the U.S. Brain project, given his talking about the EU project.
The U.S. Brain Initiative, which is not a single unified project, but will be a bunch of RFAs that are being configured now, is not underway yet. It will be underway, I think, next year, assuming the government does reopen. Let's see, maybe not. And it will be jointly sponsored by NIH, NSF, and DARPA, as well as some corporate money that is also being used. I went to some planning meetings over the summer, including one at NSF in August, where I heard a wonderful talk by Phil Rubin, who illustrated to us where it's coming from and where it's going. A big component of this is also method development. New methods on the drawing board for recording neural activity. I learned an immense amount about things I've never dreamed I would learn about, things like nanoprobes and microsensors for voltage that can report through the skull, things like that. So it will be a strong engineering focus, and then also hopefully a focus on the human brain. I'm somewhat concerned about the fact that a lot of the attention goes to model organisms, while the publicity suggests that dealing with human disease is the main focus. And I think that if you study human disorders, you need to study humans. So I'm hoping that it will become a major focus as we move forward also.
Yes.
When you're looking for connectivity, are you looking for cells that
what progress has been made to try to figure out how they have to fire in order to be together?
That's a brilliant and very open-ended question. We work primarily with fMRI recordings or EEG or MEG recordings, which are not individual neurons but populations of neurons. We're looking at things like, in the case of fMRI, very simple connectivity patterns to do with cross-correlation very often. So now it's the similarity of time series of neuronal firing patterns across time. Working with some colleagues now who are doing spike recordings, it's a different game there because of the higher temporal resolution. We have access to other information, including directionality of information flow and things like that. So it's for us principally, it's a way of we're studying neuronal time series to extract measures of dynamic relationships based on their statistics, and then relate that back to the anatomy. Others are doing other ways of looking at spiking activity, for example, that we're not pursuing. So it's a very large universe of possibilities of what one can look at and what people are actually looking at now.
Dr. Smith, I'm very interested in the research you're doing about the importance of motor development to language, and I'm wondering if you've been looking at the effect of children being plunked in front of televisions and not really doing much interacting, and how that's going to affect language development.
So I think certainly I want to restrict myself to the first 2 years of life, okay? But a lot of brain development happens after birth. A lot of those connections are between different regions, sort of the larger long pathway connections are built on post-birth. And really, Olaf's theoretical work and a lot of other work in this area suggests that you couple those areas and you train them by acting, okay? And watching television is extraordinarily passive, okay? So yeah, I think tummy time is really important. I think jumping around is really important. I think batting at things is really important. Crawling and playing with toys and manipulating them are really important. And I know that there's some new evidence that suggests that the interactive activities on iPads or screens, you know, you can punch things, that those aren't so bad. I mean, they're also multimodal, bringing things in, but I don't know. Given what I know, I'd keep those large motor activities going, personally. Yeah, I think sitting around is definitely not what you were meant to do in your first 2 years of life.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more question.
I had a question. You've commented about the strengths of large data sets. I was wondering if you could comment about possible negative consequences of large data sets, whether there are, you know, more resources that need to go into maintaining these data sets, whether there's the possibility that in this day of politicized science, people who fund these studies are going to say, well, we don't understand the data sets we already have. Why should we fund more? Could you make some comments on that?
I certainly agree with your last point. I've tried to make this point at some of the meetings I've gone to, that not enough effort is going into, not enough funding is going into actually making sense of the data we have. It may be it's quite possible that right now for the next 10 years we have enough data, and maybe we should spend our money in analyzing and sifting through, and at least for these big science consortia we have enough data. I don't think in the end that the money, that it has to do with so much with the money allocation. These big science projects, the Connectome project for instance, it sounds like a large budget, $30 million. By the time you have 100 people working on this project for 5 years, it's actually a fairly efficient use of funds in terms of the end result, what's actually been generated, which couldn't be generated by any single investigator, by any single laboratory, which is a hopefully lasting resource of foundational brain activity and brain connectivity data sets that are public. So the public part of the big data movement, I think, is very encouraging for those of us who want to use these data, understand these data, and make sense of them, because now we have access to them. Whether it competes in the end with more traditional, experimentally focused, hypothesis-based, smaller scale empirical work is an open question, and in part is the responsibility of people at funding agencies to keep an eye on and adjust. I don't think it's a huge competition right now, but certainly we should keep an eye on it, especially since the creative progress, the really unique creative things that happen, they typically come out of the smaller scale research that is done sometimes by a single individual or a single lab.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you Olaf and Linda for two very stimulating talks.